All right, good afternoon. Welcome back after the lunch break to an afternoon of further thought-provoking and engaging discussions with distinguished speakers. I hope everyone was able to do the networking that you wanted to do over the lunch break, and we're ready for the next session. My colleague Julien and I are happy to moderate this next session, where we will be zooming out a little from migration, away from migration, and situating migration within the broader geopolitical context and the EU's evolving foreign and security policy in response. As already mentioned this morning, we have been witnessing Russia's continued assault on Ukraine with no end to the conflict in sight, as well as a very concerning, evolving, escalating situation in the Middle East. Of course, these developments do not occur in a vacuum, but are symptomatic of a rules-based order that has been under an attack or more strain from geopolitical competition. Against such a backdrop, the EU is being forced to reflect on its current positioning on the global stage. We also heard that from Mr. Krastev this morning when he delivered his keynote speech to us. And EU is also reflecting on its priorities vis-à-vis the rest of the world, as well as the way in which it engages and cooperates with different actors. Which brings us to our discussion right now. And I have the pleasure to welcome a guest whom I know, also personally from previous experience. We worked together in the context of the EU, Mr. Simon Mordue. Simon, you're an Irish national with a distinguished career in EU institutions. You have been serving as the Deputy Secretary General for Economic and Global Issues in the European External Action Service since July this year. Previously, you were the Chief Foreign Policy Advisor to the President of the European Council, and also held the role of EU Ambassador to Kenya and UN institutions in Nairobi. You have extensive experience in the area of migration, enlargement, and foreign policy, with roles across various directorates general within the European Commission, and that's where we also had engagement precisely in the EU delegation in Turkey. We will also be delighted to welcome another esteemed speaker to join us in a short while to join this conversation, but we're starting with Simon, with you. So, in your previous experiences and in your current role as Deputy Secretary General to the European External Action Service, you have been engaged in diplomacy all over the world and at the highest levels, and of course, including also major crisis and conflict situations. So, what in your view have been the three shifts over this time, most clearly illustrating the geopolitical challenges that Europe is facing today?
Thank you, Sedef. And if I can start perhaps where you also mentioned, I think the international rules-based order and system is facing the strongest challenge it has ever faced. We have a permanent member of the UN Security Council who feels quite comfortable invading the territory of a neighbouring country, undermining the UN Charter, infringing the territorial integrity and sovereignty of that country, and the Security Council seems unable to provide an adequate response. And I think that puts an inordinate pressure on the multilateral system as a whole, and I think that presents incredible challenges to us. If I take a step further, we also have the rise of tension in the South China Sea. We have increasing tensions between China and the United States. And I think one of the big consequences for the European Union is it puts a premium on us being able to stand on our own 2 feet, better defend our own interests, and for want of a better word, promote the concept of strategic autonomy. And if you can see that, for example, in the priorities for the next institutional cycle in the European Union, you see a lot of importance being attached, for example, to the enhancement of defence capacities at the European Union level, enhanced defence expenditure, transforming itself not just into meeting the NATO minimum 2% target, but actually delivering more capacities, better capacities, and a better ability to use some of the instruments which have classically been associated with hard power rather than soft power. So that would be the first point I would flag. And you see this as well in the UN system, with a huge challenge ahead of us. First, to find a just and sustainable peace for Ukraine that can restore confidence in the UN Charter. But secondly, also, in the context of the reform of the international financial architecture, to find some questions to the to find some answers to the questions that many of our partners in the developing countries put about what they perceive as the inherent unfairness of the system. Look at the lending rates that a country in development would pay to support climate change transition or digital transition. It's often 14, 15, 16% interest rates, whereas in the European Union, our member states are basically able to benefit from lending at 2, 3%. That would be the first phenomena. The second kind of global phenomena, I would say, would be the rise of, for want of a better word, I would describe as the middle powers. If you take a step back 20, 25, 30 years ago, I think countries like the Gulf cooperation countries would not have been key strategic actors in the world of diplomacy and foreign policy. And today, if you look, for example, at the role that countries like the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Qatar play, they're playing a key role. Look at the way in which we were able to free some of the children who were taken hostage, kidnapped by Russia, or some of the negotiations for the freeing of the prisoners of war, or the role of Qatar in trying to free some of the hostages taken by Hamas, or bring to fruition a ceasefire in the Middle East. These are countries who are hugely important today, and where I think it's important that we are able to invest diplomatic efforts in a way which 20, 30 years ago would not necessarily have been the case. And then the last point I would perhaps make, enlargement has always been probably one of the most successful foreign policy instruments that the European Union has had and has used. But I think it's fair to say that after 2004, with the big enlargement where 10 new countries joined the European Union, it has lost a tiny bit its impetus, its dynamism. Yes, we had Romania and Bulgaria and then Croatia joining, but I think you see now the return of enlargement as a foreign policy tool to the center stage of the European Union in a way that has not been the case for the last 20 years.
Interesting, thank you. You've talked about rise of middle powers, and this was also a point that was raised in the discussions earlier today. Interesting that you also observe this and make that connection, also, of course, moving from hard power to soft power. But also in line with that discussion we had earlier today, does Europe have enough time? Does Europe need time to make these shifts as well, to respond to these shifts that you have observed? Is it because it was also in the speech of Mr. Ivan Krastev, who mentioned that what Europe needs is time, but we don't seem to have the time. Is that your observation as well?
Well, what I would just say is, if you take a step back and if you would rewind the clock to the day before Russia unleashed its war of aggression with Ukraine, I think there would probably be very few people in this audience, and even fewer people probably working in the European institutions, who would have expected Europe to have responded as we did. The reality is EU member states have delivered to Ukraine over 43 billion euros worth of lethal arms. We've used European Union instruments such as the European Peace Fund to stimulate this, drive this, and I think we have responded in a way that would not have been expected. Let me just add a word of caution. I don't mean by that to suggest for 1 minute that this is enough. Actually, I think there's still much more we could do and we need to do. But I think we have time and time again shown our capacity to respond swiftly in the face of unprecedented challenges. And also, if you look in the history of European Union, classically what has driven, if you like, integration, be it in the emergence of the euro as a single currency, be it in the transfer of powers, if you like, from member states to central European Union level, has been a response to a crisis. I think we've seen this now. I think for the next 5 years we'll see a further emergence of this. For example, defence. That will clearly be one of the big building blocks for the next institutional cycle. Or if you take, for example, to come to the theme of today, migration. You know, we now have finally the Asylum Pact adopted. This provides the tools internally to deal with some of the migration challenges and find the right balance between the responsibility, if you like, of the frontline member states and the solidarity of the remaining member states. It also creates unique opportunities for agencies like, for example, Frontex, to make another quantum leap. Again, if you'd have taken a step back to the origin of Frontex, nobody would have thought that the notion of a 10,000 standing corps would have been feasible. And the latest reflections is to take that to a number of 30,000 border guards who are effectively supporting EU member states in the protection of the EU's external borders.
Thank you. You've also mentioned the return of enlargement as a foreign policy tool. So let's look into the EU's positioning and priorities for foreign and security policy. We are talking about 27 member states with different historical experiences, geographical realities, and of course policy concerns and agendas. We are also talking about different EU institutions. You are representing one of them with different roles and priorities, as well as different directorates, for instance, within the European Commission that work on the same topic from different and sometimes also competing angles, also with partner countries, of course, in various regions. So do you think that the EU's vision for a common foreign and security policy remains a realistic one? And if so, how could it get closer to achieve more cohesion in the upcoming 5 years?
You didn't ask the question, but behind your question
Yes.
is the notion of what do we do with unanimity in the field of common foreign and security policy. The first thing I would stress is actually sometimes we are stronger united. So there is sometimes a temptation to think of qualified majority voting as the perfect solution to any challenge we face. But again, if you look at the European Union's response to Russia's war of aggression, through hard work, intense diplomatic efforts, we managed to create unity around 14 different sanctions packages, targeting some of the actors that had wreaked this war against Ukraine and some of the economic operators. And I think actually there is a lot to be said through strength in a unified way. That said, I think there are also occasions when it's clear that our efficiency or speed of reaction is impacted by the inability to find that unanimous viewpoint. And I think here we do have some interesting examples that would be worth looking at in more detail. A good example, when we came with the idea of using the European Peace Facility to supply badly needed lethal weapons to Ukraine, brackets fully in line with the provisions of the UN Charter that allow you to provide support to a country seeking to defend itself from an unjustified attack. One of the challenges we faced in the European Union was that we had 3 countries, including Austria where we are today, but also Ireland and Malta, that have a long tradition of neutrality. This was a challenge, the idea to use an EU instrument to provide lethal weapons. So we worked with the notion of a constructive abstention, which meant the countries allowed the measure to move ahead, but took care, for example, to make sure that in the case of their own contribution, this would be used rather for humanitarian purposes or defensive military equipment. And I think this is an area within the treaty where we need to dig a bit more deeper and try and encourage to find solutions where you face a challenge where you can't get unanimity, but there is still a way forward.
Thank you very much. Allow me to jump in and to capitalize on something that you mentioned, stronger when united. When it comes to migration, one of the illustrations of the recent past is the Pact on Migration and Asylum. We worked on it, we developed it, and we came up with something that we believe is representing what could be the foundations of a long-term and sustainable approach to developing capacities in Europe to better manage migration. It's primarily focused on the internal reform processes. How do you think it's going to impact, now that it goes into play, when it goes into implementation, on the external dimension of European migration policies? And if so, how?
Well, first of all, I think, as I said earlier, the Pact has ended what had been a quite difficult, at times emotional discussion on the internal reforms. We now have the tools to ensure that we have more efficient, more effective asylum and migration systems within the member states. Don't underestimate, however, the challenge of actually implementing this. There's a delay to the formal taking into effect of the legislation adopted, and I think actually in the run-up to that happening, it will be quite important that member states are already anticipating, for example, the possibility to make much more extensive use of the staff from the European Asylum and Support Office in Malta or from Frontex to support their efforts. But effectively, we now have a toolbox, when applied, that allows us to properly manage the complex phenomenon of mixed migratory flows and how to make a difference swiftly between people who have a legitimate case for protection within the European Union and others who are likely to have their asylum claim rejected and have a return order issued. Where I think the external dimension comes in is, I think, particularly in the early days of the Pact has far more chance of success, far more chance of working effectively from the very first moment if we are able to reduce the flows of irregular migrants from third countries to the European Union. And here, if I can say, I think there are some lessons to be learned, and I think later we'll have an opportunity to discuss this in more depth with my good friend, the Deputy Minister from Egypt. But I think we need to have strong engagement with partners abroad. We need to engage in a comprehensive manner with partners abroad. You will not solve the challenges of irregular migratory flows through solely, obsessively focusing on migration or returns alone. You need a comprehensive partnership that also understands the challenges that many of our partner countries face in managing mixed migration flows. You need to work in a spirit of partnership across many areas, and you need to work also, even in the area of migration, across a broad policy agenda. You know, one lesson I drew from my experience as Deputy Director General for Migration in DG Home was probably that one of the best tools for reducing the flow of irregular migration is having credible legal pathways for migration to the European Union, including the skilled labour force that many of us need in the European Union to continue to be able to fund our pensions and our way of life.
Thank you very much. I would have some interesting follow-up questions, but priority goes to the audience, and I would like to offer the possibility to our audience to ask a few questions to our guest and speaker here today. So I look around, and I invite you. There's one gentleman. The spots are very strong.
Thanks. Pete Novotny from the Martin Center in Brussels. I have a question to Mr. Mordue. You mentioned the potential increase of Frontex staff to 30,000. This is a proposition that some people have criticized. How do you see the wisdom of that objective?
If we take a step back and we can look at one other recent phenomena in the world of migration, we have seen a tragic instrumentalization of vulnerable migrants. So if you look, for example, I can see the ambassador of Finland here in the audience, But if you look at the classical approach to border management in Finland, there were a series of informal arrangements with Russia that classically over years worked. All of those assumptions today have gone out of the window. We've seen, for example, with the actions of the Belarus authorities, the way in which vulnerable migrants have been instrumentalized. We need to have the capacity to protect our external borders. And there will be times when a member state's border guard will not be able to manage or withstand the pressure of the instrumentalization of migrants or the arrival of irregular flows for other reasons, and will need support. I see, in a way, the concept of Frontex as not necessarily being always 30,000 permanent staff, but being a core which can be drawn upon when we face emergency situations and urgent pressures. I think we've got a sense of how this can work with the current situation, which is a total staff that can be mobilized at any moment in time of 10,000, but not permanently. And I think this would be the same process with the number of 30,000 if the co-legislators would accept that idea.
Thank you very much. No other questions for the moment.
Good, then we move on to the next part of this session. Thank you, Simon, for this very interesting discussion. We are now pleased to invite onto the VMC stage Ambassador Wael Badawi to join the conversation. Ambassador Badawi is Egypt's Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs for Migration, Refugees and Combating Human Trafficking. Welcome to the stage.
Julien.
And you are also the current chair of the Khartoum process, Ambassador Badawi. We're pleased to have you on the stage as well and have this occasion to discuss cooperation between the EU and Egypt on priorities on both sides of the Mediterranean.
Thank you.
You have worked extensively in the areas of international relations, development, migration, human rights, disarmament, and non-proliferation. You have also worked extensively on relations between Egypt and the EU and on the ratification and implementation of the association agreement between both parties. You have, of course, served as ambassador to in various countries, Egypt's ambassador, and you have been also in Vienna, Moscow, and Brussels. So, Julien and I will take the opportunity to ask you a couple of questions and to get your reflection on the partnership between the EU and Egypt, both of you. So, we all know in March this year, the EU and Egypt concluded a joint declaration on the strategic and comprehensive partnership, which is one of the latest of several multilateral agreements Europe has concluded in recent times. And of course, there as well, migration features as a key pillar in both EU and partner states diplomacy, in this case, Egypt. But the partnership priorities have shifted from irregular migration, you've been mentioning that, Simon, to protection, labor mobility, and skills development, among others. So, in your opinion and in your experience, what has so far been prioritized in the EU-Egypt migration cooperation from your respective perspectives? And to what extent do you think these priorities maybe ought to be reviewed and revisited in the coming years? So, please, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Sedef, for the question. Egypt and the European Union have a strategic partnership between them. We have signed this strategic partnership document. We had an association agreement that was elevated now to the rank of a strategic partnership. That strategic partnership entails 6 pillars, 6 main areas. One of them is entitled mobility and migration. And that pillar is not only focusing on illegal migration and returns and readmission. And this is because both of us, in the spirit of partnership, emphasize the need to focus more on a comprehensive approach to dealing with migration. Migration could be and is if a part of the solution. It is addressing needs in countries of origin and countries of destination. Migration, the way we look at it, we and our European partners, is that migration is a factor for development. If it can be a triple win for the migrant, for the countries of origin, for the countries of destination. So the thing is, we should deal, and we agreed with the European Union, and our cooperation goes a long way back to cooperating on addressing the root causes of migration. The problem is migration is often stigmatized as being a threat, whereas no, there is more to it. There is much more to it. There are regular migrants. Only a small portion are irregular migrants, and we need to address the root causes. In the case of Egypt, it is development. People migrate because they want a better future, a better income, and this is feasible. We have to address together the root causes to reach the notion which is very dear to the European Union and very dear to us, this notion of co-development. Oftentimes, this is really a concept we share together. So this is what we like to focus on. Security alone, securing borders is not the answer. We must really focus on migration diplomacy in a holistic approach in order to address the root causes and forge partnership with the EU. And there are many tools. Simon earlier on referred to some tools. There are many tools we deal through with the European Union. We have of course the dialogue platforms like the Khartoum process, like the Rabat process for the countries, the other African countries that are member of the Rabat process. We have the Euromed migration. We have also through ICMPD, we have the implementation also of several migration initiatives, migration for the skills mobility initiatives, talent partnership, in fact. This is very important. Legal pathways, of course, is a major concern for us. But we need to scale up these initiatives in order for us really to be able to tap on the potential and make use of the skilled labor that we have in our part of the world to address the needs also of Europe. So again, these platforms, this partnership, the spirit of partnership is key here. We are partners together.
Thank you very much. The emphasis is on co-development and sharing responsibility, shared responsibilities, and you've also mentioned, of course, security not being the most important priority, but focusing on root causes and development, migration as a factor for development. Do you see it in the same way? How is your perspective on the cooperation with Egypt? Are the priorities shared? Do they need to be revisited?
Well, first, this is still a relatively new partnership at this level, so I think it's too soon to talk about a revision of the priorities. What I would just like to emphasize is I think the most important thing was it started with a discussion that actually the challenge of migration and the management of migratory flows was a shared challenge. And I think what was hugely important was that we understood as well the critical role that Egypt was playing in offering sanctuary, shelter and protection to a very significant number of refugees from Sudan, from Ethiopia, from Syria, from Sahel, from Palestine. And so we looked at this together, and then we tried to adopt an approach which was comprehensive. I mean, let me give you a couple of examples. One of the things, for example, in the partnership, we spoke earlier about the challenges that sometimes developing countries, particularly those who have graduated and are no longer considered a least developing country, face when they go to the market to raise capital. So what did we do in the case of Egypt? We used the AAA rating of the European Union. We went to the markets, we borrowed $5 billion euro and have made this available to Egypt in the form of a loan, passing on the concessional rates we were able to obtain in the form of macro-financial assistance. Then if you look, for example, even at the approach on investment, what we've tried to do is use a very innovative approach where we take some of our development grants. We brought member states into play, we brought the international financing institutions into play, and we brought the private sector into play, creating at times leverage effects of 40 euro of investment for every 1 euro of grant. And this has a huge impact because what we're doing is we're actually using private funding to deliver public goods, but at the same time we're trying to create jobs, growth and opportunities for the Egyptian youth. And then we're trying to make a link between that and talent partnerships. So what we're trying to do is work with the Egyptian authorities, look at the kind of skills that these companies may require for an Egyptian labor force to realize these investments and offer an opportunity to come to Europe on a short-term basis in the form of circular migration, so not brain drain, which has classically been something that our Egyptian partners have not wanted to see, but on something that can genuinely raise the skill levels and contribute to the realization of significant investments in Egypt. And then even if I look on the migration side, it's been a very holistic approach. So one example of an area where we are providing support to Egypt is the Egyptian government is slowly taking over some of the responsibilities which have classically been performed in the past by UNHCR for the registration of refugees from Sudan, and part of our support is to also support the Egyptian authorities in that. And then, for example, if I look at returns, it's not just a dialogue where we are complaining with the Egyptian authorities, but we're creating space to look at what actually works. Why is it that in some cases the work of the Egyptian authorities with member states is producing much better results than in other countries, and what can we learn together? Or if I look, for example, on the talent partnerships, a lot of support to provide facilitation to make a linkage on our side between interior ministers, employment ministers and the employers' organisation. So it's really a holistic approach to our relationship, but also a holistic approach to migration. And I think that is the secret of success. And in my mind, this is a model that I think we can, with of course adaptations, because each country is specific, gives us a chance of actually finding a way through.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. You mentioned that the management of migration is a shared challenge. We strongly believe that joint leadership generates shared responsibility, that it's an essential element of cooperation. In turn, international cooperation is also an essential element to migration governance, basically. In the years to come, or months and years to come, we will see most likely more migration partnerships emerging, more efforts. In the journey which has led you, EU and Egypt, towards this declaration and shaping it, what takeaways would you like to share and maybe to provide to influence or advocate and support further partnerships and to share with other countries?
Shall I go? Well, the key takeaways is the importance of international cooperation. The principles enshrined in the Global Compact on Migration, the Global Compact on Refugees, Global Compact of GCM to have a safe, orderly and regular migration. And for the GRF, the principle of burden and responsibility sharing. Also, that comes up also in another format in the GCM. Because countries, as you said, Sedef, with the crisis we have in many spots of the world, and in where I come from, we have Sudan, we have Libya, we had Syria also. So it's really, we have serious push factors for migratory flows into host countries like Egypt. We are currently hosting more than 10 million refugees and migrants who live mostly in a refugee-type life. And all of these are integrated into our society. They receive the basic services on par with national Egyptian citizens, but there's a capacity that we can sustain to try to provide this protection, the protection for those who need, and the services for those who don't need the same protection, but who need the services, of course. So this is where the principle of burden and responsibility sharing must come in. We are currently moving, I wish to maybe say a few words about the refugee regime that we are now transitioning to in Egypt. We are currently we will adopt during this legislature a national law on refugees and asylum seekers, and we are currently preparing ourselves for the transition from UNHCR, who is since 1954 taking up the responsibility. We delegated the responsibility of several operational measures to do on behalf of the government of Egypt. We are now preparing to the transition where we will take back this responsibility to abide by our international obligations. And this we are proud to be working in tandem with UNHCR and also with the EU via the EU European Agency for Asylum. And in fact, later on this afternoon, we are due to adopt the second roadmap with the EUAA. So this is to tell you again, Julien, that the spirit of partnership is very important. We want to try and to benefit from the best practices in transition mechanisms that have worked before to be able to assume this responsibility. But again, the key word here is importance of international cooperation and shared burden and shared responsibility. Otherwise, the challenge is not going to remain at our level as host communities. It will go beyond. There is certainly a limit to our capacity if we do not work together to try and upgrade and inject funds and work together on development issues, also to be able to better integrate these newcomers. But better would be also to solve the problems at the origin, to solve the root causes. In these cases, we need peace. We need to reach peace in the countries of origin, the origin of these mixed movements that Simon referred to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mordue.
The first point I would just make is the policy objective should never be to stop migration. Migration is a natural phenomenon. It's a phenomenon that's been with us since the very day of our existence. And if you look at the statistics over history, classically 3 to 4% of the world's population have been migrants. And equally interesting, it is normally considered by economists that 3 to 4% who are migrants have contributed roughly 7% of our global prosperity. I think our challenge is to end rather the business model of smugglers and organized crime syndicates who effectively exploit vulnerable people and make a profit, and today largely decide who reaches our society. It will not be easy. If you like, what we're trying to do is replace disorderly, irregular flows with organized and to the maximum extent possible managed flows. And I think equally for Europe, we have a tradition of being proud to offer protection to those who are genuinely in need and fleeing crises or in danger. And it's important that we're able to bring orderly flows into action, also to protect the space to continue to offer protection and have an acceptance for that in our own societies. How do we do it? It's not going to be easy. I think we need on our side to view migration as a challenge which needs us to work closely with many partners, both in our bilateral relations. I'm a huge believer as well on the European Union side that we need to work hand in hand with the IOM and the UNHCR. I think we should continue to be generous in offering resettlement, picking up on your point, so that we can actually resettle people from as close as possible to the crisis or conflict in which they have fled and sought refuge, so avoid them having to take, for example, desperately dangerous journeys across the Sahara or across treacherous seas. I think the European Union has classically been the biggest single provider of development assistance in the world. I think it's important that we continue that, and we also try wherever we can to use our development assistance to create partnerships with partner countries where we can also crowd in the private sector, create investment, create job opportunities. And last but not least, I think we have a large part of the world's territory covered by conflicts which drive displacement. We need to try wherever we can to use diplomatic efforts to bring an end to these conflicts. And we're also continuing to face increased migratory movements linked to, for example, the consequences of climate change, which underlines the importance of us continuing to do our best to mitigate that and bring down the global warming.
Thank you very much, Simon, for joining us today and sharing your observations as regards the shifts we see in the European Common Foreign and Security Policy in response to the geopolitical challenges we're witnessing, we're facing in Europe, and of course also in the neighborhood. It was also good to hear from you talking about creating spaces together, learning from one another, and sharing responsibility and having this holistic approach to migration with different actors, with the private sector and others, in your experience with Egypt in this specific cooperation. And I think we do also look forward to seeing more examples of this type of cooperation. It's in the very early stages, of course, but from what I can hear from both of you, it sounds promising, and I think that the emphasis is on the right spot, the focus is there. So let's see if we can take it forward, if you can take it forward. Thank you very much. And I'd now like to continue with Ambassador Badawi.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Ambassador Badawi, we've already talked about this. Your country has been feeling the consequences of regional developments in Sudan, in the Middle East. These developments have already and will most likely continue and serve as a driver of forced displacement to Egypt's borders. So how Egypt has been coping with this massive influx of migrants from the region? You've already mentioned this, but I think we'd be interested to hear more details about that. Also, in particular, in providing protection to these displaced persons.
Thank you. Thank you, Sedef. Yes, the government of Egypt has done a lot in partnership with our partners in development. The EU, we have a long-standing partnership, I must say, with the EU, but with others also, with the UN system family also. We have been working a lot to revamp and better prepare our infrastructure, which is under severe strain because, you know, we're a population of 110 million inhabitants. The consequences of the wars against in our neighborhood, also the conflict on Ukraine has had an economic impact on Egypt, on the cost of living and the provision of services for the whole population. So let alone the newcomers. From Sudan alone, we count about 1.2 million new arrivals from Sudan as of the 15th of April 2023. And we have a registered population until last September, registered refugee population of 800,000. We used to have, in 2011, we had only 110,000. In 2022, it tripled, we had 320,000, and now we are at 800,000, and that's not all. I mean, UNHCR capability to do the RSD and the registration also is under severe restraint, so or under severe strain. So this is really a challenge. And now to provide the facilities for all these refugees and the migrants who live a refugee-type life is of serious concern. Now we have launched several initiatives to work with our partners on enhancing the services, the protection that is required, and I'm happy to announce that we launched on the 30th of September a very innovative program with the UN family, with the IOM, UNHCR, WHO, and UNICEF. It's a first time in the world that the UN family, 4 agencies come together to work on a joint program for health and education, for migrants and refugees and host communities. And when I say host communities, this is really a very important factor when dealing with migrants and refugees, because not only must we always focus with this population of 10 million plus refugees and migrants, we should focus on the cohesion within this migrant and refugee community, and also between this community and the host community. Of course, we're proud to have a principled manner, principles of human rights, respecting human rights of our migrants and refugees on our soil. We do not have camps. It's an out-of-camp policy. The government follows an out-of-camp policy, and this is often referred to by IOM, UNHCRs, and others that this is the best-of-class approach. But on the other hand, it's a challenge to be able to mobilize the resources required. When you see camps, it's very alarming, it's scaring, it's frightening to countries beyond, so it's easier to mobilize and attract funding. But in our case, because of the proximity, because of the cultural proximity, these guests, as we refer to them, integrate very easily into our society. And therefore, we couldn't actually let ourselves put them in camps. So we try and adopt a whole of government approach to mobilize and coordinate between all the ministries, the private sector, and the NGOs. The NGOs are major partners to be able to integrate these migrants and refugees into society. So we work a lot in this area, integrating them, and of course we would like to see resettlement quotas, as Simon referred to, increase. Complementary pathways also are more than welcome. Job creation, I mean, this is of utmost importance. So this is how we deal, what we are currently doing, and we will continue to do so. But we need the support of our partners to be able to sustain and to be able to integrate these newcomers who come by the day. It's very important. Thank you.
Thank you. You've talked about the figures. You've talked about the various efforts you're undertaking to provide the protection space and the assistance and support that refugees and host communities require. At the same time, and I understand there's a major engagement with the UN family through a joint program in this regard. Now, at the same time, Egypt is interested in developing its own migration and asylum system. Given that this would include issues like protection and return that are sensitive, how can Egypt put in place a human rights compliant system that offers protection space to those in need, whilst also ensuring addressing the legitimate concerns of its population and the country in terms of, economic and security concerns? In this regard, also, I'd like to hear from you what you would expect, what Egypt would expect the partnership, the strategic and comprehensive partnership you have with the EU to concretely translate into, because that partnership we have heard is around the principles of shared responsibility, partnership, and burden sharing. So how could you be supported by the EU in this regard?
Thank you for the question. Now, concerning the transition to our national asylum law and putting a whole mechanism, this is really a very interesting, I will not say it's an exercise, it's a task that we've been entrusted to, and it's the first time, of course. Now, we are currently cooperating, as I said, with UNHCR and the EU and many EU countries, and outside the EU also, to see what are the best practices in countries also like Turkey, like Kenya, countries who have preceded us. We were among the countries that drafted the 1951 convention. And we, of course, ratified that convention, and we signed and ratified the 1969 African Union Convention also on selected issues of the refugee problem in Africa. So we have always honored our international obligations, and this is what we seek to do by this procedure of transitioning into a national asylum law, and ourselves doing the whole process from A to Z. Of course, it's not easy, but we try. Now we are at the phase of, currently we're going to, maybe this year we are going to adopt the law, and then there will come the bylaws. We see how our our partners have already adopted. We get a lot of help, I must say, also from the EUAA. And we see what's the best practice to try and establish a system that is respectful of the human rights-based approach in dealing with refugees, especially vulnerable groups, vulnerable people in vulnerable situations, women, unaccompanied minor, because we often talk about mixed movements. So we have different needs, different categories, and different needs, and we have to be able to address the protection needs of each and every one of these categories. We have already set in place preliminarily like a referral mechanism to try and see how to better identify the needs of each vulnerability and whom they would be referred to. But our law, in fact, I want to say a few words about the law. The law is going to be, of course, it's going to be in line with the 1951 provisions and the 1969 Convention of the African Union. So it will entail also the principles of non-refoulement, the right to work, right to freedom of belief, right to property, like to use, to have access to local like administrative, judicial procedures, right to property. So, and we will have a national committee, interministerial community, encompassing all the competent authorities, so that we can deal with the refugee from a global perspective to ensure that all their needs are catered for in the best manner. But again, I come to the point where we need the support and international cooperation to be able to deliver also the protection needs. I mean, we do what we can, what we have, and our obligations, our legal obligations, it's an obligation to conduct. So this is what we are very keen on, and we try to do our best, but we need international cooperation again in this area. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador. It's very interesting. You talked about the development of new legislation package, literally, to develop the necessary capacities of Egypt to assume its full responsibility with regard to this population in need of protection. But I would like to now move to another development which has happened of late, which is more of an institutional development. In a context where the primary stakeholders of migration are often ministries of interiors. Egypt has recently, over the summer, if I'm not mistaken, decided to have the Ministry of Foreign Affairs absorbing the Ministry of Immigration and Expatriate Affairs. How significant is this change in light of Egypt's visions and efforts to develop a wall-of migration governance system? And also, what role will partnership play in this regard?
Thank you. You've been following us quite closely, it seems,
Always.
in July. Yes, we used to have a Ministry of State for Egyptian expatriates that has been rightfully absorbed by the ministry. It's been merged and absorbed into the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This was a development because, I mean, when in Egypt, when you look at migration, again, we look at the whole spectrum. So when we deal with migration, we have immigration, migration, and also regional cooperations. So we have to think of about our diasporas and who will be the partner easiest to reach. The diaspora is going to be, of course, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs with the embassies and consular posts. Not only that, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is by nature the focal point on migration issues. So we are the ones coordinating, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is the one coordinating with the Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Defense, and Ministry of Social Solidarity, all the entities, the government, and also other partners who deal with migration, mixed movements, refugees. So we are more coordinating, and we are in charge of this business to better also partner with our partners outside Egypt. So this is why the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is, having this integrated format of dealing with refugees and migrants through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is beneficial for Egypt, for the migrants, and for the refugees, and also for our partners to know who their interlocutor is. And so in fact, it is to the better, so that we can even deal in a more integrated and more quicker fashion with the needs to address the protection for those who need protection, and the services or the facilities that others may need among the migrant community.
Thank you very much. Just maybe an immediate reactions. You mentioned in the development of the legislative package related to national. So the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was in the lead of coordinating with all the stakeholders.
Of course. We were the one convening the meetings together, and we included all. It was an interministerial committee that drafted that law to make sure that that our international obligations were transposed into a national law.
Thank you very much. I would have obviously tons of questions, and we can continue the discussion for a very long time, and we will. But I would like to turn towards the audience and see if we have any questions or reactions to this part of the panel. Please do not hesitate to join us and interact with Ambassador Badawi, that we have the pleasure to have with us today. I thought we would have enough time after lunch for people to digest.
It's been a long session.
Maybe I have a short add-on to your question.
Feel free.
When you asked me about the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it's good to know also that we have a diaspora abroad that is also about 10 million Egyptians. So this makes it more relevant to have the Ministry of Expatriates and Immigration also integrated with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So this is...
Maybe I have, there's a question there. I had a question too, but I'll ask the audience then to come forward.
Hello, thank you, and thank you, Ambassador. Jennifer Tangney from ICMPD. Many times in the talent partnership approach, we see that there is an aim to match sectors of interest, those with labour shortages in the EU, and those priority sectors in Egypt. Could you give a little bit of information about what those sectors are for you? Because I think for many of those in the room, thinking about how their private sector might be interested to engage, it would be very useful to know a little bit more about the kind of partnerships that you would like to see.
Thank you for the question. Thank you, Jennifer. With the talent partnership, I mean, we have several initiatives going under the talent partnership. We have TAM, which is a partnership with the EU and Germany, and later on, it's going to the phase 2. We're going to start shortly phase 2 with Italy also being involved. And this, for instance, we have chosen jointly with our German partners 7 professions like baking, electricians, heating and air conditioning, tourism and hotels, and 3 other domains where we could form people in Egypt to have the curricula certified by and the skills recognized by Germany, to be able to accommodate the number of skilled persons they wish to receive in Germany or later on in Italy. We also have another program with Austria, also in the field of metallurgy. We have something also with Italy in the field of agricultural seasonal workers. Also, agriculture is one of the most sought fields with our European partners, Greece, Cyprus, the same. We have also mechanics with Germany. There is an ongoing project with them. But obviously, these projects are unfortunately still at the pilot project stage. We really want to scale them up. We have many training centers. We have also some like Italian and German centers, training centers, but we have also local centers who are ready to be like revamped, to be able to be lifted to the standards required to maintain the levels required for European markets, and this is very easy to do. So we are very much interested in this. And in parallel to this, and the ICMPD is the implementing partners of many of these initiatives that come under the talent partnership. And in parallel to these like multilateral, bilateral forums, we have bilateral labor migration agreements with Greece, Italy, and Cyprus, for instance. These are also for certain professions and also within the spirit of seasonal migration, though we would like to see that our skilled laborers are well integrated into society, into the country of destination. And here I would like to say a couple of words about the importance of changing the narrative when we talk about, when we deal with migrants. Integrating them is really of utmost importance, to properly integrate them into host countries, their countries of destination, so that they better perform and they give, I mean, the best of themselves for the sake of host countries and countries of destinations. And we're very keen, through my ministry, to keep the ties. It's very important also to keep the ties between the diasporas and their home countries. And I see my colleagues here from the Khartoum process, they know very well that it is an issue not only dear to Egypt, but to all countries outside the EU, who really insist on the importance of keeping the ties and the roots of these migrants with their home countries. Thank you. I hope that has addressed your concern. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do have, since we have a few more minutes left, I do have, oh, there's another question.
Yes.
Yes. And thank you, Ambassador. Catherine Woolard from the European Council on Refugees and Exiles. And thank you for the extremely rich presentation. I wanted to ask you about one of your last points there, about this function sitting with the Foreign Ministry. And when you engage in what we now call migration diplomacy, how many of your counterparts have that same kind of structure, where this issue is sitting with the Foreign Ministry? Or are you dealing primarily with interior ministries? What would you say of the advantages of this being a Foreign Ministry competence? The reason I ask is because in Europe, the trend has been the opposite. In the 70s and 80s, the function tended to sit with foreign ministries. Now it doesn't, with the exception of one European state, which also happens to be the most progressive on this issue. So from our perspective, looking at the rights of refugees, where that competence sits does make a difference, but I would be interested in hearing your thoughts.
Thank you very much for the question. It's a very interesting question, but I don't think I would be the best person to answer that question. From where I come from, we see also the importance of balancing national security needs with development needs and governing migratory flows. I mean, this is the problem. Migration is not the problem, it's how we govern it. And in Egypt, we see that it's better to have this migration diplomacy via the Ministry of, or through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as I said, as a focal point to rally all other line ministries, including ministries of defense, ministries of the interior. But oftentimes when we come in dialogues and other platforms here with Europe, oftentimes our interlocutors are ministers of interior. This is their prerogative, but obviously, I mean, we can work both ways. It is their prerogative. I cannot say more. But from where I come from, we prefer to have it in a more integrated perspective through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because there's a lot of multilateral work also when I refer to the Global Compact on Migration, Global Compact on Refugees, and these are like major, trend-setting conferences, consistent, coherent, recurrent work, even when we work with our partners in the EU, the Rabat process, the Khartoum process, it's always a political, there is also a political dimension, multilateral dimension that ministries of foreign affairs usually deal with and can have a significant contribution backed by the line ministries, of course, and bearing in mind the interests of this and that line ministry. So this would be my answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe one last question. Oh, there's another one. Good. I don't get to ask my question, but that's better.
I will wait for your question. Don't you worry.
Yes.
Thank you. Thomas Muscat from the Maltese Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and sincere apologies to Sedef for keeping her from her own question. Just one small thing. Since you mentioned the importance of integration, and I fully agree with that, if we are talking about circular migration to avoid brain drain, there's also the issue of reintegration, of returning migrants. I'm just wondering how this is being factored into what you are planning in the new law or in your ministry's policies. If you could give some indication how it works in practice, it would be wonderful. Thank you.
The question is on integrating migrants into society, correct?
Yes, reintegrating, returning migrants.
Returning migrants.
Who have returned from circular migration.
Okay. That's a very good question. When we talk about circular migration, we have a vested interest to have first that migrant or skilled labor well integrated into the country of destination for obvious reasons. And then back home when he comes, we must make sure to integrate him back into society, to make sure that he has a job, and that he tries to also to have, we prefer if they can have, to become entrepreneurs, to create more jobs, and to share their expertise and the skills that they have maybe perfected abroad. So this is important, and it's of utmost importance when you talk about illegal migrants who are returning back home, because if you properly integrate him back home, you will make sure that he will not repeat the same mistake a second time. So this is important, and we have a fund. We have a fund for that, and a fund that depends directly from the cabinet of the Prime Minister, dedicated to this return and reintegration for irregular migrants. Now, this is for the irregular migrants, but we have also a separate programs with the EU, notably with the German, with the GIZ. Also, we just, embarked on a new program. We have a special center with the Germans in Egypt that was formerly run in cooperation with the Ministry of Immigrants and Expats, and now it's the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We are jointly running this institution to be able to integrate regular migrants who decide voluntarily to come back home to establish themselves. Because, of course, the brain drain is really depleting our resources. They are formed, trained, it costs money, we are already under enough strain as we are, and you get them to work as doctors, nurses abroad, and then we lack. So it's very important that we govern this migratory flow in a really like the best way we can to have a brain gain instead of brain drain. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Looking at the audience, I then ask my question.
Yes, please.
Egypt is currently the chair of the Khartoum process. So we were together last week in Lisbon in a joint meeting with the Rabat process. And of course, it's been not a very long time in this function as chair, but from what you have observed and in your opinion, do you think these multilateral tools remain pertinent to finding common ground, common understanding, to address some of the challenges that you are facing, other countries in the dialogue are facing? For those who may not be familiar, it's an intergovernmental dialogue on migration, bringing East African and European partners together. So, and do you see room for improvement, and how?
I certainly see room for improvement, and I am very much encouraged. I mean, we have assumed the chairmanship since April last year, and we had a very important joint high-level meeting between the Rabat and the Khartoum process last week in Lisbon. This is the one you are referring to, and it was particularly on skills mobility and finding innovative ways. And I can tell you that I was really very much inspired and reassured to see that the challenges, both the challenges and the solutions, were commonly presented from both sides of the Mediterranean. And I can tell you from the participants what I saw, that there was a determination to work together and really to try and make this thing work. So definitely Khartoum process, Rabat process are platforms for dialogue, for political cooperation and dialogue at the political level, and it is very beneficial, I can assure you. And one of our priorities as Egyptian chairmanship of the Khartoum process is to put more visibility to such processes, and especially to the Khartoum process being the junior process under the Joint Valletta Action Plan, to have a ministerial conference for the first time. We are celebrating 10 years of Khartoum process since it started, and we would like to end our chairmanship with a ministerial conference where we have ministers from Europe, from Africa, the European Commissioner in charge, the African Commissioner in charge also, really to give more visibility and to reaffirm the commitment of both sides at the highest level to the importance of partnership and governing migration in a holistic manner for the benefit of all the countries, origin, destination, and transit countries, for the benefit of the three countries and the migrants themselves. Thank you. I do not want
Thank you very much.
to encurtail upon the next panel.
You have certainly a lot on your shoulders, not only in your capacity as chair of the Khartoum process, but we've talked about, of course, all the pressures, all the burden you are shouldering in terms of mixed movements, but also, of course, with the plans to establish your own asylum and migration system, which is a very huge undertaking, which will probably last many years. So there's a lot to be done, but I think it's everybody is also looking with interest towards Europe. Certainly the attention is with you, as well as, I hope, lots of support. So thank you for joining us today and sharing your perspectives, insights, and experiences. And yeah, we'll continue to engage with you. It was lovely to have you with us today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me with you this afternoon. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.